April 20th, 2018. Still got snow last night, and now it covered everything. Hey YouTube, I had got some questions about different kind of, I don't want to use the word defects, but things that are in wood that help to determine its grade. And I can't go over the grading right now because there's just not enough time, but if you look at this, this is what's known as a spike knot. In other words, the knot's coming in on the side of the board and it tends to make like a V-shaped knot there. So that's a spike knot. Then when we get down this board a little bit further, we have what's known as a red knot. Now I had gone over these knots once before, but I just want to show a couple other little things as well. So this is a red knot. It's sound, there's no rod or anything to it. And then you've heard me talk about wane. The wane is when the wood runs out and you end up with bark on the tree or on the wood, or else nothing at all where it runs off. And then this would be a pin knot. Just a little red knot that has a pin to it, like a small pinhead type thing they call it. Now this here on this board, this is called a pitch pocket. Okay, it's sort of like the shape of kind of like an eye, sort of drastic. It has like a flat bottom and a rounded top, and it's very sticky in there, so that's a pitch pocket. Here's another example of a pitch pocket. That's on that 4x4 that I cut the other day. Pitch pocket. This is a good example of a black knot. I don't know if you can see that, but it's loose all the way around it. So that's a black knot, but it's not rotted. You can see how straight the face is and smooth. So that's it's not a defective black knot, it's just a black knot. Now all these things determine the size of them, and how many are in a board determine what the grade is. And I'm going to be going over that in the future. Now this is a little tough to make out, and the snow around it doesn't help much more. But this is known as a compression failure here. In other words, this tree was wanting to lean one way, and I'm not talking about the hole here, although this is part of it where my finger is, that seam there, but it comes around and it goes like this. It's known as a compression failure. The tree had stress on it at that point and just broke apart in its early years. This is another good example of a spike knot. If you think of a railroad spike, sort of what gives it its name, I guess. This is a good example of the grain that you get in white pine. Knots in it. Sometimes the grain is pronounced really well like this, where the color of it is a little different. Every now and then you get a really nice looking knot that's like this one. I don't know if you can see it. And some people don't like the knots. Some people are, they don't like it at all. And then this, on this same board here, this is something like this is a seam here, where something had at one point scratched the bark off of the tree, and then the tree grew around the bark, but the bark was dead already, so it stayed, intact as bark. This is like a seam as well, where the bark was growed around by the wood as it aged. This is one of the flower boxes that I made my wife, and I used the pine that I had. This is the bottom of the box. This is also a stress crack here. Now it's not going to matter for this because it's the bottom of the box, and I'm actually going to be drilling holes in here for water to come out. So stress crack. Now this is a really good example of a seam. You can see how long it is, And you can see how the tree up at the top here grew around it. So in other words, there was bark here, and something probably over on this side or possibly on the other side stopped the tree from growing naturally like it was over here, and it tend to grow around the bark. So that's known as a seam. Okay, a seam in the wood. Now the seam can break apart as well. You can see there's a crack in there. I don't know if you see it right at the edge of my finger there. And there's another, this is actually the same 2x4, but a different section of it. Another good example of a seam right there. Spike knot. Wane. Pitch pockets. When they're not too big, it's just known as a pitch stain. And this side here would be clear, known as clear wood. But you can see that there had been a little bit of a check in here. It's hardly noticeable. Got to turn it to a couple different ways to actually see it. But that's a check. So a check is similar to a crack at the end of the board, or even in the middle of the board. I don't have a good example of a shake, but a shake is when the board comes apart on the annual rings, and you'll see it in the grain. It'll be like a crack down through. I don't have a good example of that right now. Next time I find something for it, I'll show you what it looks like. Another example of a check. This is a good example of what decayed wood looks like as compared to good stuff. That's a good wood there on the right, and the decayed is on the left. This is an example of a decayed black knot. A decayed black knot. And then that's an example of a plain black knot. You can see the center rings in the knot yet, even though the outside bark is there. That's what gives it the black knot name. It's not really decayed yet. And some of them stop decaying once you process them and dry them. This is an example of what's known as a torn grain. Usually stuff like this happens during the planing process. Torn grain. And then this is an example of what's known as a machine burn. Usually from the planer, but it can be from other things. This little brown line there that's running from one side of the picture to the other, that's known as a pith. That's where the center of the tree was sort of like, if you know what punk is, it's sort of like a punky type material. Very center of the tree. The center of the annual rings. So today, because of the weather that we had this morning, I started working on the bottom part of the chicken coop that I want to add on to the coop we have right now. So that's going to be covered in mesh. There'll be a run underneath the chicken coop. I'm just going to add a 4x8 area to it. The 4x4s laying there are going to probably end up on the deck. Although I did get some a different type of copper coat, I think it's called, I bought today. I got to go pick it up at Home Depot. So that's about the extent of my day today. The weather had me screwed up right from the start this morning. You can tell from my first pictures. It eventually melted, but the temps are still in the 30s here. So it's around 8 o'clock at night, and you can see there's still some snow in the woods, but this whole thing was covered this morning. This is where I took a picture, I think, this morning. And you can see there's some stuff left in the woods there. But like I say, the temperatures are, it's cold yet. It's only in the 30s. So, well guys, have a good one. Looks like we got the moon up there. Bye.